The snow had fallen silently that night, covering the town in white and swallowing her footsteps. I found the envelope tucked in the drawer she always kept locked, her handwriting trembling across the page like it was trying to escape. When I read it, I realized she had been leaving me a trail she never meant for anyone else to follow. Hit the subscribe button. Mara Whitman, a woman in her early 30s, returns to her childhood home after her mother vanished in a winter storm 10 years earlier. The house is small, frost creeping along the windows, and every room smells faintly of pine and old paper. Mara carries both grief and unease. She has lived in the city, but nothing there could prepare her for the quiet weight of the past. As she sifts through her mother's belongings, the letter calls to her, and the line between memory and mystery begins to blur. The desk smelled like dust and old wood. Sunlight slanted through the blinds in thin stripes, cutting across the surface like quiet fingers. I hadn't been in this room for years. It felt smaller than I remembered, though the memories inside it had stretched themselves over a decade. The envelope caught my eye immediately. Yellowed, stiff, wax cracked along the flap. It was tucked in the corner drawer my mother always said was for things too heavy for the air. I hesitated. My fingers hovered above it, shaking just slightly, though I couldn't tell if it was fear, anticipation, or the cold seeping from the floorboards. The room was silent except for the faint hum of the heater. I lifted the envelope. It was lighter than I expected. The handwriting on the front, the looping, careful letters, I knew it without reading. Her hand. My mother's. And then the snow started, tapping against the window in tiny, persistent fingers. The streets outside became quiet, muffled. The world felt small, compressed, as if it had been holding its breath for me to find this. I tore the envelope open slowly, careful not to crumple it. The paper smelled faintly of pine and ink, of something she left behind in a hurry. The letter inside was folded neatly, but the corners were worn from years of being held. I unfolded it and began to read, silently, the words curling into my mind like smoke. She wrote about fear, though never naming it. About the wind before a storm, and footsteps she wished she could erase. About decisions she made alone. Every line trembled, both warning and confession. There was longing there, too. A hope that I might understand something I had no way to know. My chest tightened. I remembered her sitting at this very desk, her hair falling in a loose braid, a faint smile on her face that didn't quite reach her eyes. The snow outside thickened, settling on rooftops, lamp posts, the skeletal branches of the trees. It muffled the town, made it smaller, quieter. I could hear it land softly, almost reverently. The sound was like waiting. Like the world was listening along with me. I traced the edges of the envelope with my thumb, as if touching it might bring her back. Her handwriting curved under my fingers. She had written for me, but she had vanished before I could reply. It felt impossible that the years could stretch so thin, that time could fold in on itself like this. I remembered her laughter, the way it would fill the kitchen in the morning, warm and full. I remembered her voice at night, whispering advice that made sense only when I was much older. And then I remembered her absences, sudden, unexplained, and always leaving a hollow room behind her. I sank into the chair at the desk. The letter fell open in my lap. I read and reread certain lines, circling words with my eyes, letting them sink in. The warning wasn't loud. It didn't shout. It was folded into the quiet of the sentences, into the gaps between the words. And that was the part that made it unbearable. That quiet. The knowledge that she trusted me to hear what she couldn't say out loud. The wind rattled the window pane. I could smell snow pressed against the glass. I remembered the smell of her coat, pine and cedar, and something faintly bitter, and suddenly it was everywhere. I felt the distance between us collapse, and then stretch wider than I could bear. She was close, yet so impossibly far. I set the letter down and watched the snow accumulate on the sill. Tiny crystalline shapes forming and melting, fragile and transient. My fingers itched to write back, but I couldn't reach across the years she had stolen from me. I could only sit and feel the weight of the moment, the small, fragile connection that the paper provided. A memory surfaced unbidden. I was 10, standing on the porch as she buttoned my coat, the wind tugging at our scarves. She bent down, pressed a kiss to my forehead, and whispered, "Be careful, always careful." At the time, I thought it was just the wind that made her anxious. But now, reading her words in the envelope, I understood. She had been careful for both of us, even in her absence. The room darkened slowly as the afternoon light waned. Shadows pooled around the desk legs, pooling like ink in corners. I traced her handwriting again, wondering about her state of mind that day. Had she known she would disappear? Had she thought about me holding this very letter years later, feeling the same trembling? I could almost hear her voice under the hum of the heater, soft, careful. I picked up the envelope again, holding it close. The wax crumbled under my fingers. The smell of pine rose sharper now, almost like her presence pressing against the edges of the room. I felt both connection and distance, an ache that carried decades of unanswered questions. It was beautiful and painful at once. I pressed my palm to the letter, letting it rest there for a moment. Outside, the snow had coated the streets completely, white and hushed. I imagined her walking through it, disappearing into the storm, leaving me nothing but these words. And yet, somehow, it was enough. Almost enough. I leaned back in the chair, the letter still in my hands. The room felt alive, holding the echo of her voice, her touch, her presence. I didn't know why she had chosen this moment, or what exactly she wanted to warn me about. All I knew was that the letter existed. That it waited. And that for the first time in 10 years, I felt her near. The snow kept falling. Tiny flakes drifted past the window, each one unique, each one fragile. I traced them with my eyes, watching them settle on the sill, on the porch, on the world that had moved on without her. And for the first time, I let myself imagine her somewhere beyond the white, somewhere quiet, waiting, and knowing I had found her words. I folded the letter slowly, carefully, as if putting it away might somehow keep her close. My fingers lingered on the envelope one last time. Outside, the world was muted. Inside, my chest was full and hollow at once. I didn't have answers. But I had a trail. A whisper of her, pressed between paper and wax, waiting for me to follow. And I would. The snow had grown heavier by the time I stepped outside. It clung to my coat, settling on my shoulders, forming a soft, muffled silence around the world. Each step into the white felt deliberate, like I was entering a space that had been waiting for me all these years. The town was quiet, almost too quiet. Only the crunch of my boots against the snow broke the hush. I walked slowly, retracing paths I hadn't thought about in a decade. Streetlights glowed weakly through the storm, their halos blurred by falling flakes. Every familiar corner seemed different, somehow older, smaller, and yet untouched. It was like memory and reality were layered, each step peeling back one layer, exposing the other. I passed the bakery where she used to bring me warm bread on Saturdays. The windows were frosted over, the sign swinging lightly in the wind. It was empty now, but I could almost hear her voice calling me in, her laughter rising like steam. The wind tugged at my scarf, and I pulled it tighter. The footprints behind me were mine, and yet I felt them following, some echo of her, some echo of what happened that night. My chest tightened. I stopped at the corner and looked toward the edge of the forest. The trees stood like black shadows against the white sky, silent witnesses. Something pulled me toward them, an invisible thread I couldn't name. I walked past a broken gate, the iron bent and frozen with frost. A scarf hung there, old and tattered, caught in the spikes. I remembered her coat, the one she never wore inside the house. Could it have been hers, or just another ghost of winter? The snow swirled, blinding, yet I felt it guiding me. I didn't want to follow, and yet I couldn't stop. Something waited. I didn't know what. At the forest's edge, the trees opened slightly, revealing a path hidden beneath branches weighted with snow. The ground was uneven, roots and rocks covered by frost. My boots sank in deep at every step. The air smelled of damp pine and cold earth. Every sound, the distant rattle of a branch, the whisper of the wind, was amplified in the silence. I stopped, listening. Was that a footstep behind me, or only the memory of her? I followed a faint trail through the trees. The snow clung to my eyelashes, melted against my cheeks, leaving tiny rivers of cold water. I saw a flash of color, a scarf, a bag, something left behind. My hands brushed over it carefully. Nothing I could name. But it felt like a message. Someone had been here, not long ago. Or perhaps it was her, or someone carrying the weight of her last hours. I found a clearing, almost hidden, where the snow lay untouched. The space felt sacred, still. I knelt and touched the ground, the cold biting through my gloves. I imagined her here, alone, deciding, pausing, leaving traces she couldn't erase. I could almost feel her breath, her heartbeat, as if she had waited for me to arrive. My chest tightened again, a mix of longing and unease. I noticed remnants of a fire, blackened stones rimmed with frost. A branch, broken and charred, lay half buried in snow. I knelt closer, my fingers brushing against the cold wood. The smell of smoke rose faintly from the ground, though the fire had burned out years ago. I could feel the weight of her presence, the echo of her decisions, lingering in this frozen space. Did she mean to leave a path for me, or was it simply the memory of her own footsteps? I wandered the perimeter of the clearing, my eyes scanning for more clues. Small footprints, partially covered, hinted at someone else's passage. The forest was heavy with silence, yet every snap of a branch felt loud, alive. I imagined her there, warm coat against the cold, hair dusted with snow, eyes scanning the trees. I wanted to call her name, but my voice would vanish into the storm. The wind shifted, carrying a faint scent of smoke, or maybe cedar. My chest ached with the weight of her absence. I remembered her hands, the way she would fold letters carefully, pressing them until the paper felt like it had been held 1,000 times. I pressed my gloves together, wishing I could feel her touch, even briefly. I stopped at the edge of the clearing. A faint light flickered in the distance, through the tree's abandoned cabin, or another shadow of memory. I didn't move closer. I just watched, letting the light bleed into the darkness, holding it in my mind. The snow fell heavier now, coating everything in quiet. My footprints faded behind me, swallowed by the storm. I thought about the letter in my hands, how her words had guided me to this place. Each line felt like a whisper in the wind, each pause a breath of her presence. I realized I was chasing more than a memory. I was chasing her. Or perhaps I was chasing the part of myself that had been left behind when she disappeared. The snow settled around me, soft and persistent. I felt both lost and found, suspended in the quiet between trees and snowflakes. I imagined her walking ahead, pausing to look back, waiting for me to understand. The wind whispered through the branches, carrying with it a faint warning and an unspoken invitation. I turned back toward the path leading home. The snow muffled my steps, and for a moment, the world felt smaller, intimate, holding only me and the echoes of her presence. I pressed my hands to my chest, feeling the rhythm of my own heartbeat against the memory of hers. Back at the edge of the forest, I paused. The town lay behind me, the street lights dim through the falling snow. The forest held its secrets close, and I felt the weight of them pressing gently, waiting. I looked down at the footprints I had made, half covered by fresh flakes, and realized they might never lead exactly where I expected. I started walking again, slow, deliberate. Each step was careful. Each breath tasted like winter and memory. And I wondered, as the wind tugged at my scarf and the snow kissed my eyelashes, if she had known I would come. If she had left me this path to follow, or if the forest simply remembered her better than I ever could. The light in the cabin flickered again, distant, faint. I didn't move toward it. Not yet. I just let it exist in the corner of my mind, a promise or a warning I couldn't yet name. And I knew, somehow, that the answers I sought were waiting beyond the snow, just out of reach. I turned my face to the wind and let the snow fall over me. It was cold, but it was quiet. And in that quiet, I felt her presence for the first time in years, just out of sight, watching. The house smelled different now. Older, quieter. The faint tang of pine cleaner still lingered, but beneath it, there was something heavier: dust, old wood, and a memory I could almost touch. I moved through the hallway slowly, boots brushing against the worn rug. The creak of the floorboards echoed in the empty rooms like a voice I hadn't heard in years. I returned to her desk, the one where I'd found the letter. Sunlight was fading, the shadows stretching long and thin across the floor. The envelope still rested on the desk, open, curling at the edges. I traced her handwriting once more, almost as if by touching it I could feel the warmth she had pressed into the page. My eyes fell on the bottom drawer. It was always locked. I had tried once as a child to twist the key, remember the way she would shake her head, smile faintly, and say, "Some things aren't ready yet." The drawer called to me now. The key sat in my palm, cold and heavy, tucked into a small tin where she had left it long ago. My fingers trembled as I turned it in the lock. There was a small click, sharp in the quiet room. I pulled the drawer open slowly, careful not to let the hinges groan too loudly. It slid outward, dark inside, holding its secrets tightly. Inside, dust motes floated in the thin rays of late afternoon sun. The drawer smelled faintly of cedar and ink. Stacks of papers were tied with string, envelopes yellowed and curling. At the very bottom, a small, leather-bound journal caught my eye. Her initials were embossed on the cover, worn but unmistakable. I touched it carefully. It felt alive under my fingers, like it had been waiting for me. I opened the journal, pages brittle, edges fraying. The first entry was dated weeks before she disappeared. The handwriting was smaller than in the letter, cramped and precise. Each line was a careful dance of confession and observation. She wrote about the wind, the way it carried sounds from place to place, how she sometimes felt it whispering warnings. I read on, my chest tightening, my fingers gripping the journal as if letting go would make her vanish again. There were notes about people I barely remembered: neighbors, friends, even strangers she had watched carefully. Every observation seemed mundane on its own, but together they formed a pattern, a network of concern, of hidden threads. I realized she had been mapping something I didn't yet understand, tracking shadows in her own way. My heart pounded with a mix of awe and unease. Had she known what was coming? Had she already left breadcrumbs for me to follow? I lingered on a page where she mentioned me, though never by name. She wrote of a child she loved fiercely, the one who asked too many questions, the one who sometimes wandered too far. Her words were full of longing, soft warnings tucked between lines of affection. I could feel her presence behind every sentence, a voice just beyond reach. I traced the words with my fingers, feeling the texture of the ink, the history pressed into the paper. The drawer seemed to breathe around me. I could hear the wind outside, snow brushing against the windows, the faint groan of the house settling. I imagined her sitting here, writing late at night, pausing to listen, thinking, leaving herself fragments of explanation I wouldn't fully understand for years. I felt the ache of those missing moments, the weight of questions that had hovered for a decade. I turned the pages carefully, one by one. There were sketches, 2 lines tracing trees, fences, a house I recognized from the letter, a map of the town with little marks in the margins. She had been planning, observing, preparing. And yet, there was fear too. Fear pressed into the edges of her words, quiet but insistent, like a shadow hovering behind a closed door. I paused at an entry marked with the same date as the letter. She had written about storms, the ones that start quietly and build without warning. About leaving messages that might not be understood until much later. About needing someone to follow, to notice the small signs, to trust instincts she couldn't fully explain. I closed my eyes and imagined her here, hands moving quickly across the page, snow beginning to fall outside, aware of what might come but determined to leave something behind. The drawer creaked as I shifted, reminding me of the house around me. I breathed slowly, letting the weight of her words sink in. There was love here, yes, but also tension, careful observation, a kind of quiet vigilance. Every page made me feel both close and impossibly far from her. It was as though I could reach her across the paper, but never touch her hand. I ran my fingers along the edge of the journal, feeling the indentations of words she had pressed into the leather. A photograph slipped out, a small, folded picture of her standing in the snow, coat wrapped tightly, hair dusted white. She didn't look at me, but I could feel her gaze anyway, the weight of it gentle but undeniable. My chest ached. Why had she left this here? Was it a memory, a warning, or a challenge? The snow outside grew heavier, blanketing the streets in quiet. I could hear the faint shuffle of footsteps in the distance, or maybe it was my imagination. I pressed the journal to my chest, feeling its weight, the stories inside pressing gently against my ribs. She had chosen this moment, I realized, to leave something tangible, something that could guide me through the cold, through the years I had lost. I closed the drawer slowly, leaving the journal on top. The lock clicked faintly, final but not absolute. Outside, the wind stirred the branches, brushing snow against the windowpane. I felt the presence of her careful observation lingering in the room, in the drawer, in the spaces between objects. She had left me breadcrumbs, yes, but also questions, and I wasn't sure if I was ready for the answers. I stood for a long time, staring out the window as snow coated the world in silence. The house seemed to hold its breath, the shadows of the furniture stretching long and still. I could feel her presence everywhere, in the wax of the envelope, the fragile paper of the journal, the cold edges of the locked drawer. I didn't understand it all yet, but I felt the first pull of knowing her attempt to bridge the distance between us, to speak across the years she had vanished. I picked up the journal again and held it close. The pages smelled of pine and old ink, the edges softened by time. I wondered how much she had known, and how much she had feared. I wondered if I would ever find the truth, or if it would always hide between her words, in the pauses she left intentionally. The snow fell harder now, a curtain of white outside my window. I pressed my hand against the cold glass, feeling the chill through my skin. Somewhere beyond the street, beyond the forest, beyond the winter itself, I could feel her waiting. Not gone, not lost, just beyond the edges of my perception, a presence in the quiet spaces she had left behind. And I knew that tomorrow, I would open the journal again, tracing her words, following her map, stepping carefully into the trail she had begun long before I could understand it. I didn't know where it would lead, but I would follow. I had to. The snow had settled overnight, thick and soft, erasing all familiar tracks. I pulled on my coat, gloves stiff from the cold, and stepped outside. The air smelled like iron and pine, crisp enough to make my lungs ache. Every exhale came out as mist, curling upward and disappearing into the pale morning. I looked down at my own footprints forming behind me, fresh impressions in a white world. For the first time in years, I felt both nervous and resolute. The streets were quiet, almost eerily so. The wind whispered through the bare branches, scattering light snow across the sidewalks. I remembered her words from the journal, the arrows and circles she had drawn. I had no map, no directions, just a collection of signs left in her handwriting, hints stitched across the town like breadcrumbs. I could almost hear her voice in the hush of the snow, soft and deliberate, guiding me without moving her lips. I followed the first arrow she had drawn, stepping lightly over the frosted pavement. The neighborhood seemed ordinary houses lined neatly, smoke rising from chimneys, but the snow transformed it into something unfamiliar. Shadows stretched long across the blank lawns, and every muted sound, my boots crunching, the faint bark of a distant dog, felt amplified. I kept glancing at the edges of buildings, the curve of fences, searching for subtle clues I might have overlooked. Halfway down the first street, I spotted it, a set of footprints, not mine, pressed lightly into the fresh snow. They were small, deliberate, leading toward an alley I had always ignored. My heart jumped, but the tracks didn't match any adult stride I recognized. They seemed hers, though impossible. I crouched and studied them, the snow melting slightly under my fingers. Could she have walked here before she disappeared, or had someone else passed this way, marking the path she had intended for me? I followed the footprints, careful not to disturb them. The alley smelled of wet wood and earth, the snow collecting in little drifts against the walls. A stray newspaper flapped in the wind. I shivered, pulling my coat tighter. The footprints ended abruptly near a rusted gate. I leaned close, brushing snow off the latch, revealing a faint scratch, a mark the first had seen in her journal. My pulse quickened. The smallest detail, almost invisible, felt like a message meant only for me. What was she trying to show? I stepped through the gate and into the backyard she had described in her notes. The snow here was thicker, untouched except for my footprints. Trees leaned over the yard, skeletal and still, shadows pooling beneath them. I noticed a rock near the base of one tree, half buried, just as she had mentioned. Kneeling, I brushed the snow away and found a tiny envelope, yellowed, with a fragile wax seal cracked like a memory. My hands shook as I picked it up. The envelope felt like her hand reaching for mine across the years. I opened it slowly. The paper inside was delicate, brittle at the edges. Her handwriting filled the page, each letter deliberate and careful, carrying the warmth of her voice across the decade. She spoke of small things first, the cold, the snow, the quiet, but then the words grew urgent, warnings woven into memories. I read them aloud softly, letting the syllables fall into the empty yard. Each sentence pressed against my chest, heavy and intimate. Was this what she had meant when she said the maps were stories? Snow began to fall again, light at first, dusting my hair and coat. I didn't move. The flakes coated the letter, clinging to the edges of the paper, as if trying to shield it from the world. I remembered the afternoons we had spent in this yard, her teaching me to spot bird tracks, showing me how snow could tell a story if you looked closely. And now, standing here alone, I realized she had left this letter in the exact place she had always intended me to find it. It was as if she had been waiting. I folded the letter carefully and placed it inside my coat, warming it against my body. My breath came shallow, my heart loud in the quiet. I noticed the footprints I had followed, they had faded slightly in the fresh snow, almost as if the world itself was trying to erase her presence. But the gate, the rock, the envelope, they remained. Small signs, persistent and deliberate. I took a deep breath and looked up at the grey sky, realizing that the first step had already been taken. I continued along the path she had drawn in her journal, following faint markers I had barely noticed before: a bent fence post, a chipped curb, a branch broken at shoulder height. Each one felt like a sentence, each pause a comma in her quiet narrative. The town felt alive in the snow, every ordinary object transformed into a clue. I realized the world had never been ordinary, it had always been a series of hidden connections I had yet to see. By afternoon, the snow was heavier, the air thick and cold. My gloves were damp, my boots heavy, but I pressed on. I reached a small bridge over a creek, her arrows pointing me there in careful loops. The water ran under ice, a slow, muffled sound, dark and reflective. I paused at the railing, peering down, thinking about the days she had taken me here as a child. She had shown me how to skip stones, how to listen to the current, how to wait quietly for answers to appear in unexpected ways. Could this bridge hold one of her answers now? I noticed something faint in the snow near the edge of the creek, a mark, shallow but intentional, almost like a letter pressed into the ground. I knelt, brushing the snow aside carefully, revealing a small wooden token. It was smooth, worn, with a carved symbol I had seen in her journal. I held it in my hand, feeling the cold seep through the wood, feeling the connection she had left behind. Her presence seemed to linger here, in the silence, in the snow, in the subtle way she had guided me. The sun dipped low, grey light fading into the muted evening. I retraced my steps, careful not to disturb any new clues, and returned to the gate where the first envelope had been. The world felt suspended, as if waiting for me to understand. My footprints pressed into the snow, temporary and fragile, but the marks she had left endured. I realized she had anticipated my every hesitation, my every doubt, the slow unraveling of my memory and curiosity. She had led me here, and I had followed, step by careful step. I paused at the gate, turning back to look at the yard. The snow swirled gently, shadows pooling in the corners, but I could feel her presence everywhere, soft, deliberate, watching. I folded my arms around myself, holding the small envelope to my chest. It felt like a heartbeat. I whispered her name into the quiet, not expecting an answer, but wanting her to hear me anyway. The snow fell, covering my tracks, hiding them from the world, and yet, somehow, preserving her story just for me. I knew then that this was only the beginning. Each footprint I had followed had led me closer to her intentions, closer to understanding the warnings and love she had left behind. The snow would continue to fall, covering streets and paths, erasing the obvious but leaving subtle signs. I would have to watch, to feel, to follow carefully. And I realized that her guidance was never about revealing everything at once, it was about learning to see what others overlooked, to notice what the snow hid, to hear what the silence whispered. The evening grew colder, the sky a dim, heavy grey. I pressed the wooden token and envelope close to my chest and took a slow breath. Tomorrow, I would continue the trail. Tomorrow, the snow and her marks would speak again, and I would be ready. For now, I let the quiet settle over me, the wind brushing against my face, and the feeling that I was not alone even after all these years. The morning was still. Snow had fallen overnight, covering the world in quiet white, softening the edges of everything I knew. I stepped onto the porch, boots sinking slightly, leaving thin tracks behind me that would vanish in minutes. The air smelled of pine and frost, sharp but clean, and I breathed it deeply, letting it fill the hollow spaces I hadn't realized were empty. The house behind me seemed smaller somehow, yet alive, humming softly in the cold. I could feel the weight of her presence everywhere, pressed into the walls, hidden in the floors, lingering in the frost on the windows. I held the letters close to my chest, strings of paper bound by time and memory. Each one trembled in my hands as though it carried a pulse. I had read them over and over in the quiet of the house, tracing every line, every sketch, every folded corner. They were pieces of her I hadn't known I could hold, fragments of a life she had lived alongside mine but always just out of reach. And now, finally, I could feel her, not in the act of leaving, but in the care she had taken to guide me, to protect me, to tell me her story without ever being there. I walked toward the clearing where the snow had collected thickly, footsteps muffled by the soft carpet beneath me. Trees leaned under the weight of frost, their branches tracing delicate patterns against the gray-white sky. I paused at the edge, letting the silence settle, listening to it press against my skin. Somewhere beneath the snow, I imagined her footprints, her path, the places she had touched and left behind. The memory of her laughter, the echo of whispered warnings, the sharp absence of her touch, all of it mingled in the cold air, tangible and tender. I knelt in the snow, brushing the flakes aside to uncover the stone where we had once sat together, back when she still came and went without explanation. I could see it clearly in my mind, her coat draped over the back, the warmth of her hand in mine, her eyes soft but distant, always holding something unspoken. The letters felt heavier here, as if the snow itself were pressing against them, urging me to understand not just the words, but the intention, the care, the love. I unfolded one last note, the one she had saved for me, and the words were simple, direct, yet laden with everything she had never said aloud. Her handwriting trembled slightly, the ink faded but deliberate. She spoke of the storm that had come too early, of choices she had made that I would never fully understand, of a hope that I would find her in the pieces she left behind. I pressed the paper to my lips, tasting the faint residue of time and memory. My chest ached, a quiet ache that had nothing to do with grief and everything to do with connection. I understood, finally, that her disappearance had not been absence, it had been preparation, a careful orchestration for the day I would come to know her in full, in fragments, in letters and hidden drawers and frost-covered windows. The wind rose then, lifting snow into the air in slow, deliberate swirls. I could barely see the outlines of the forest, but I could feel it, the hush of life under snow, the patience of the world pressing against me. I closed my eyes, letting the storm surround me, and imagined her walking beside me, a shadow in the white. I could feel her hand brush against mine, not as a ghost, not as memory, but as a tether, a promise, a quiet reassurance. I whispered her name softly, letting it fall into the storm, and the wind seemed to answer, lifting the syllables into the sky. I spread the letters on the snow before me, watching them catch the wind, watching them settle back down, fragile and enduring. Each one was a piece of her heart, a puzzle I had been building slowly, carefully, across the years. I traced the edges with my fingers, letting the cold bite, letting the tenderness sink in. There was no fear now, no need to rush. I understood that discovery was not a single moment, but a slow accumulation, a layering of memory, love, and time. The snow around me reflected the quiet rhythm of her voice, steady, patient, deliberate, teaching me to move slowly, to feel, to remember. A crow passed overhead, its wings cutting through the pale light, and I thought of all the small signs she had left, the subtle markers of presence that I had missed until now. I wondered how long she had planned this, how carefully she had folded herself into the world in ways only I could uncover. The answer didn't matter. What mattered was the here and now, kneeling in the snow, letters in hand, feeling her near in a way that didn't need explanation. The clearing stretched endlessly, yet I felt rooted, anchored by understanding, by connection, by the fragments she had left behind. I folded the last letter carefully, pressing it to my chest, and stood. Snow clung to my hair, to my coat, to my eyelashes, and I let it, letting the cold cleanse the ache and leave only clarity. I walked slowly back toward the house, the letters warm against my heart, and the wind carried a whisper I could not name but recognized instinctively. She was here, in the letters, in the snow, in the quiet between each breath. The house rose ahead of me, silent and patient, and I opened the door without knocking, as if I had never left. Inside, the air smelled of wood smoke and cedar, familiar and unbroken. I set the letters on the desk, aligning them in the order I had found them, as if creating a map of her life and our connection. I pressed my hand to the wood, feeling the warmth of memory and presence. She had left me everything, a path, a story, a truth I could carry into the world. Outside, the snow continued to fall, soft and steady. The wind whispered through the trees, and I felt a quiet sense of completion, though I knew it was only the beginning of understanding. I pressed my palm to the window, frost against my skin, and let the memory of her hands press back. The storm had passed, but the snow remained, a quiet, enduring presence, much like her. And for the first time, I felt both the ache of absence and the warmth of connection, folded together in the same slow rhythm that had always defined her life, and now, mine. I turned from the window, leaving the clearing and the storm behind, carrying her letters, her love, her warnings, and her whispers in my chest. And though I could not see her, though I could not speak to her, I knew she had never left me entirely. She had only asked me to look, to listen, to remember. And I would. The snow fell heavier now, thick and patient, as if the world itself was holding its breath. I stepped outside once more, letting it cover my footprints, letting it blur the line between past and present. And beneath the last snowfall, I understood at last, she had never really gone. If you like this true hit, subscribe this story, like, share and comment on video.